We all know theMeatly as the creator of the famous and iconic indie horror franchise Bendy, and also Showdown Bandit, I guess. They really don't need any introduction. Despite not even being at the peak of its popularity per se, Bendy is a cultural phenomenon, a widely beloved IP, and undeniably a staple in the field of indie horror. But when you have such an incredibly successful brand, it's easy for the public to forget, or never even be made aware of, where you first came from. We all know Scott Cawthon because he made the funny bear game, but if it weren't for a troll game, chances are we wouldn't quite remember Doofus. theMeatly's history of game development doesn't go that far back, but it does go farther back than the first build of Bendy and the Ink Machine, which most people don't seem to be aware of. I wasn't aware of this until recently. But first we need to go back to theMeatly webcomics, which you've probably seen a few of at some point. They were pretty much what you would expect from webcomics from the time, a series of comics with theMeatly's distinct style that were short and sweet, usually based upon a simple joke or punchline. But the interesting thing about theMeatly's comics is that a lot of them are all about game development, whether it be a joke about the video game industry or the struggles of being a developer. And this very concept actually became theMeatly's first game. Allow me to introduce you to Meatly Makes. Meatly Makes is a game made by theMeatly that released in early 2016. For reference, the first Bendy chapter released in early 2017. theMeatly describes Meatly Makes as a silly horror game for developers, and the game is very evidently based on the comics that I mentioned. In Meatly Makes, you play as theMeatly's famous character as he develops games on a laptop. While you try to develop a series of banger video games, there are 3 enemies you need to combat during the process. I'll discuss the meaning behind these silly little guys in a bit, but first I'm simply going to break down the gameplay loop. This game features very few mechanics, and it's entirely played using the mouse and WASD. S on your keyboard is used to program your game. You essentially just have to spam S until a video game is complete. Once a game is complete, it'll appear in a random part of the screen, and you click on it to obtain it. Complete and collect the amount of games indicated by the top left, and you beat the stage. W, A, and D are all used to combat different enemies. W is used to swat at a little cloud goblin that appears and floats above you. It circles around you, and you need to swat at it at the right time, and if you miss, you have to wait for them to loop back around. As it circles you, it slowly drains your progress. D is used to combat the freak that bursts out from inside your laptop. This character reduces your progress in much larger chunks, and is definitely meant to be prioritized during gameplay. With this enemy, all you do is deliver a very clean jab to their face. And A is used to combat a silly flying creature that essentially acts the same way as the cloud, but without the element of timing, draining your progress until you spray it away. There's also a boss fight every 5 levels. A massive monster will slowly approach you, and you need to complete a series of quick-time events to win, and then the game continues as normal. This game doesn't have an end, it goes forever, and it's merely a challenge to see how far you can get, and what your score can end up being. I'm not going to say this game is some kind of underappreciated masterpiece, because I don't think it does anything quite spectacular enough to earn such a title, but I cannot stress just how satisfying this game is to play. The gameplay itself is almost like a fidget toy, almost like a mobile game. It's just a cute, fun game to simply keep your hands busy. I describe it as a good ADHD game. If you have nothing to do, and you need something to focus on and actively do, this game is perfect for that. It's also great for that purpose, as it is very stimulating, primarily because of its sound effects and very simple details. The punchy, cartoonish sound effects and the screen shake every time you land a hit just tickles the neurodivergent mind in a beautiful way. This is just a surprisingly fun game despite its simplicity. Would I put this up against some of the significantly larger games we've played and talked about on this channel and back it up as being as good or better? No, I can't say I would do that. But it doesn't need to be all that. The way you need to time certain attacks, the way you need to act and think quickly, and the satisfaction of progressing are all valid enough reasons to simply enjoy the game. Not to mention that this game is really stunning visually as well. Obviously it all takes place in this one room, but this art style is genuinely gorgeous. I think the aesthetic of Bendy is one of its best qualities, and Showdown Bandit was also very much carried by its stylistic choices above all else. But I honestly wish there was another game from theMeatly that featured this style, cause it's just so pretty and charming. But now it's time for me to tell you what these little goblins I've told you about are, what this game is about, and why I actually really love the concept of this game. Much like theMeatly's comics from back in the day, this game is a silly, playful portrayal of the struggles of being a game developer, and the enemies are representations of obstacles that frequently come up. The cloud is called the Idea Fairy, and is a representation of what it's like to have new and different ideas interfere with the project you are currently working on. The enemy in the laptop is called Glitch, and it's a representation of a bug occurring in your game as you're working on it. And the goofy flying enemy off to the left is called Downfish, and is a representation of a joyless worker that will squeeze the life from you. I'm gonna be so real, I wish this one was different. I guess this is in reference to when you have to work with a negative or toxic person, which is totally understandable, but I really wish a different struggle was chosen, because this is bizarrely judgmental phrasing, and a pretty big yikes after a long history of workplace complaints and accusations for people that would have worked with and for theMeatly in the past. That's not to throw shade at theMeatly, for the record. That situation is in the past, and I have faith he and Mike have grown as people since, but it's still pretty awkward to say the least. But that's besides the point. The very concept of this game is about having to overcome the many struggles that interfere with the process of developing a game, and it's portrayed in a creative and charming way. But what I really love about this is that although theMeatly described this game as being for game developers, and he assigned a meaning to the threats present in the game, you can treat this game as a representation of the struggles of working in really any creative field. As a content creator, I could very easily change the Idea Fairy very slightly to be about getting new video ideas. I work with the Adobe Suite every day, and trust me, it'd be very easy to replace Glitch with the many fatal flaws of that software. And instead of Downfish being about toxic or negative people I work with, I could very easily replace it with the pressure of being in the public eye, or the way random people online feel the need to constantly judge you. I've gotten pretty used to that, so that'd be disingenuous, but I sure as hell could do it. That's just one example based purely on what I personally do, but you can see what I mean when I say this idea and this concept can very easily be altered and applied to all fields of creative work. In fact, I'm also going to pitch you a completely different interpretation of this game and its concept. Remember when I mentioned that this was a quality ADHD game earlier? I wasn't only thinking of the gameplay when I thought of that phrasing. To me at least, this game is also an excellent representation of having ADHD. It's an artistic portrayal of the desire and want and even need to get work done and stay focused on a particular task, but something borderline non-existent is always in the way. Since the enemies are meant to be representations of struggles, they don't really look like anything aside from silly cartoon characters. So if you ignore the intended meaning of them, like I already did in my alternative, you could always interpret this as what's going on in the mind of someone with ADHD. You want to work on something, and you literally have the thing you want to work on in front of you, but there's just these indescribable distractions in your head, always holding you back, sidetracking you, almost teasing you. I know I said earlier that I wasn't going to act like this game is some kind of underappreciated masterpiece, and I am most definitely completely overthinking this. And I may sound slightly insane right now, I'm not sure. But understanding the meaning that theMeatly put into this game, being able to relate to that meaning to some extent, and getting surprisingly invested into this simple but addictive game just really caused me to think about it a lot. I genuinely adore the meaning that theMeatly ascribed to this project, and I really appreciate how open for interpretation it can be, whether that was intentional or not. Again, I am definitely overthinking this, but I couldn't help but enjoy overthinking about this thing. And it's not crazy to think that theMeatly wanted this to be something meaningful. The Bendy franchise is known to cover a variety of serious and interesting subject matter, a lot of which is very taboo in the world of indie horror games and series. I don't even really like the original Bendy and the Ink Machine as a game, but the reason I would never describe it as a bad game is because of its aesthetic and art direction, but especially because of its storytelling and character writing. Meatly Makes is nothing as grand or great as the now massive Bendy franchise, but it's from one of the main minds behind that grand and great franchise. So the idea that there is something to analyze here isn't unlikely, and the idea that it's fun to analyze is far from surprising. With all that being said, be on the lookout for another stream of this game on this channel, because I have the third highest score in the game in the world, and you better believe I am going to fucking gun for that #1 spot. Thank you for watching.